What if a billionaire CEO, desperate to secure his family's legacy, made an impulsive proposition to a temporary agency hire, a woman who accidentally shattered his composure in more ways than one? Could a staged engagement save his empire, or would it ignite a chain of events that neither of them could ever control? You're out of your mind. Find someone to replace you in an hour. Ethan Sterling's voice thundered across the marble foyer, echoing off the high ceilings of the Sterling estate. He was pacing near the grand staircase, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his knuckles white. No, Victoria. This is not just another party. This is the last birthday my grandmother might ever have. He paused, his jaw clenching as the call ended abruptly. The screen read, "Call ended." He closed his eyes and let out a low, shaky breath, dragging a hand through his thick chestnut hair. His custom-tailored suit, usually crisp and perfect, now clung a little too tight, heavy with the sudden, crushing weight of panic. Victoria, his ex-girlfriend, had agreed weeks ago to pretend to be his fiancée, just for this one night, just for the sake of a dying woman's wish and a crucial merger deal that depended on maintaining the perfect image. Now she was gone. "Sir, I. A splash, a gasp. Ethan turned sharply. By the breakfast bar, a young woman stood frozen, a silver tray at her feet, orange juice pooling around its ornate base. Her apron was crooked, her hands trembling. Wide, startled eyes met his. Her name was Olivia. He vaguely remembered her from the quick agency hire last week. Just a temp, brought in to help prep for the impending party. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, bending down to gather broken glass, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said quickly, striding over and crouching beside her, his earlier fury momentarily forgotten. "Don't worry about the juice." She blinked, surprised by the unexpected softness in his tone, a stark contrast to the thunderous anger she'd overheard moments before. "I'll clean it up right away." He looked at her then, really looked, her messy bun, flushed cheeks, hands scraped from where the tray had fallen. She was clearly overwhelmed, clearly not meant to be in the middle of any high-stakes social charade. And yet, his grandmother's voice echoed in his head. "I don't want some glamorous trophy, Ethan. I want someone who loves you, really loves you." Ethan stood silent, watching her mop up the mess with a handful of napkins. "Olivia, right?" She nodded, her cheeks still pink. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." He hesitated, the storm behind his eyes seeming to still for just a moment. "This is going to sound insane," he said slowly, carefully, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "But I need your help, for just a few hours." Her brow furrowed, confusion clouding her eyes. "Help how?" He exhaled, the weight of his predicament pressing down on him. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancée, just for today, just for this party. I'll explain everything." Her mouth opened, then closed again, speechless. "You want me? Why?" "Because I don't have anyone else right now," he admitted, a raw honesty in his voice. "And because you're here. And because," he added, a strange, almost desperate look in his eyes, "you don't know me well enough to lie convincingly." Olivia's eyes widened. "That's not exactly a compelling reason." He let out a short, nervous laugh. "It's all I've got. I'm not good at pretending," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I spill juice. And that," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips, "makes you perfect." She stared at him like he had completely lost his mind. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime deal," he said, his voice lower now, persuasive. "Not just for me, but for my grandmother. She's not well, and she told me she won't sign over the Sterling Trust unless I find someone who truly cares. I was trying to fake that part, but maybe you don't have to fake it. Just be kind. Be yourself." Olivia swallowed hard, her mind racing. What if she messed it up? "I'll take care of it," Ethan said softly, sensing her hesitation. "All you have to do is smile, and maybe hold my hand once or twice." She bit her lip. Her eyes darted to the elegant grandfather clock in the hall. 11:05 a.m. The party started in 55 minutes. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll do it. Ethan blinked, stunned by her quick acceptance. You will, she nodded. But only because you asked like you actually needed me. Not like you were doing me a favor. And for the first time that morning, Ethan Sterling smiled. A real one. Not for cameras, not for deals. For her. What if the most beautiful dress you've ever worn was a costume for a lie, and beneath the carefully crafted illusion lay a secret heartache too heavy to bear alone? The dress didn't fit quite right. The hem was a little too long, the neckline a bit too modest for the opulent setting, and the zipper snagged stubbornly halfway up. But as Olivia stood in front of the tall, ornate mirror in one of the Sterling estates and used guest rooms, her breath caught. It was, without a doubt, the nicest thing she had ever worn. Soft cream chiffon, delicate vintage lace around the cuffs, borrowed from a forgotten costume rack in the cavernous theater room. She smoothed the luxurious fabric with trembling fingers. One night, she told herself firmly. Just one night. In the mirror, her reflection looked like someone else, someone elegant, someone poised. But beneath the borrowed glamour, her chest thudded with a familiar, heavy weight. The medication had been running low for weeks. Her last cardiology appointment confirmed what she had already known, what she had desperately tried to deny. Without the heart surgery she couldn't afford, the odds were relentlessly, terrifyingly stacked against her. She hadn't told anyone. What was the point? Who would even care? A soft knock on the door pulled her back from the precipice of her thoughts. Olivia! Ethan's voice, muffled, but close. She opened the door, her heart fluttering nervously. His eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then something else, something unreadable, in their depths. You look, he trailed off, searching for the right word. Not polished, not glamorous in the way Victoria, his ex, had been, but real, utterly, captivatingly real. She offered a shy, tentative smile. Like someone pretending to be someone else? No, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Like someone people might actually believe in. What if the simplest acts of kindness, in a world obsessed with appearances, shone brighter than any diamond, capturing hearts and challenging a legacy built on cold ambition? Downstairs, the party had begun. The grand hall of the Sterling estate glowed, a breathtaking symphony of shimmering light and sophisticated sound. String lights looped gracefully over the high, wooden beams, and soft jazz drifted from a grand piano tucked in a sun-drenched corner. Guests in tailored suits and elegant evening gowns mingled effortlessly, champagne flutes clinking, a low hum of polite conversation filling the air. Servers weaved gracefully between them, their movements practiced and precise. Ethan stepped beside Olivia as they entered, his presence a silent anchor in the overwhelming sea of unfamiliar faces. She felt every gaze in the room turn their way, a wave of curious, assessing stares. His hand found hers, his touch surprisingly warm, steadying. You okay? He asked, his voice a low murmur under his breath, meant only for her. She nodded, barely. Just pretending, she whispered back, a nervous flutter in her chest. They began the slow, obligatory circuit around the room. Ethan introduced her with a gentle, quiet pride. My fiancée, Olivia. She smiled politely, curtsied once by mistake, then laughed a little too loudly at a joke she didn't quite understand. But each time she faltered, each time her nerves threatened to betray her, Ethan steadied her with a reassuring glance, a subtle touch of his hand on her arm, a shared, almost imperceptible breath. When the room grew too loud, too overwhelming, she slipped away, escaping through a narrow corridor that led, she hoped, towards the relative calm of the kitchen. She needed air, needed a moment of silence to gather herself. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with the controlled chaos of a high-profile event. But here she wasn't noticed. Here she was just another girl in an old dress, invisible. So, she rolled up the delicate chiffon sleeves and started helping the frazzled pastry chef arrange perfect, ruby-red strawberries on a tray of miniature tarts. You with the Caldwell party? The chef asked, his brow furrowed in concentration, barely glancing at her. Lily nodded. Brave woman, he muttered, then let out a weary chuckle. She laughed, a genuine, unforced sound. It's just one night. But she stayed. She stirred caramel, a comforting, rhythmic motion. She folded linen napkins into intricate swans. She listened with genuine empathy as the sous chef vented about burnt crusts and last-minute, impossible menu changes. And when a young, flustered waiter spilled a tray of delicate hors d'oeuvres, sending them scattering across the polished floor, she was the first to kneel and help him clean up the mess, her movements quick and kind. Back in the hall, Ethan had noticed her absence. A subtle frown creased his forehead as he scanned the glittering crowd. When he finally found her, deep in conversation with the elderly head gardener about the best way to nurture heirloom tomatoes, he didn't interrupt. He just watched, a strange, unexpected softness spreading through his chest, melting away some of the icy armor he had so carefully constructed around his heart. Later that evening, the family gathered in the drawing room for speeches and cake. His grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, seated in her favorite velvet armchair, observed every moment in a regal, assessing silence. When Ethan brought Olivia over to greet her, the old woman took Olivia's hand, her grip surprisingly firm, and held it gently. "So," she said, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You're the one." Olivia's voice trembled. "Yes, ma'am. I'm honored to meet you." The old woman studied her face, her hands, her eyes, then looked directly at Ethan. "Different than the others," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of experience. "This one doesn't pretend." Ethan opened his mouth, but found he had no reply. Olivia looked down, unsure if she should smile or apologize. Eleanor squeezed her hand. "Keep her close," she said to her grandson, her voice suddenly sharp, commanding. "She's not here for the money. She's here for you." And for the first time that night, Olivia stopped pretending, because she realized with a sudden, overwhelming clarity that someone saw through it all, through the borrowed dress and the nervous smile, and still didn't look away. What if the quiet rhythm of genuine kindness in a house of rigid rules began to chip away at a hardened heart, revealing a truth far more compelling than any contract? Breakfast at the Sterling estate was served sharply at 8. Not 5 minutes before, not 5 minutes after. The long dining table stretched beneath a vaulted ceiling, where sunlight filtered through magnificent stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across the polished mahogany. Olivia sat at the edge of a velvet-cushioned chair, trying desperately not to slouch, trying not to breathe too loudly, acutely aware of the opulent silence. Toast crackled as the liveried server placed it precisely beside her plate. Across from her, Ethan scrawled through emails on his tablet, his expression unreadable. To his left, his grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, sipped black coffee with the unwavering precision of a woman who had once navigated Wall Street conversations with a single, imperious lift of an eyebrow. Olivia stirred her tea in silence, her fingers brushing the delicate porcelain rim. This world, this house, with its antique chandeliers and vast library wings, was not hers. But she had promised to play the part. For Ethan. For the paycheck she hadn't dared to ask about yet. For the surgery she might never get in time. Later that day, she found herself in the kitchen, where Martha, the head cook, was struggling with a complicated recipe for an upcoming charity gala. "They'll say it's too sweet," Martha muttered, slamming a spoon onto the marble counter, her face flushed with frustration. "Want to try flan?" Olivia offered gently, tying back her hair, a soft smile on her lips. "My gran used to make it with just 4 ingredients and a whole lot of patience." By noon, they were laughing, a rare, warm sound in the usually formal kitchen. Olivia stirred the rich custard while Martha watched, a flicker of curiosity, then respect, in her eyes. They poured the mixture into ramekins, tucked them carefully into the oven, and when the caramel cracked just right, Martha, to Olivia's surprise, hugged her tightly. "That's the first real smile I've had in weeks, child," she said, her voice thick with emotion. In the afternoon, Olivia quietly folded linen napkins into intricate little swans and left one at each staff member's place setting in the break room. She wasn't trying to charm anyone. She simply liked to leave small, unexpected joys behind, like breadcrumbs of kindness, in case the day turned bitter. She didn't know Ethan had seen her, standing barefoot on the back patio, tossing breadcrumbs to a flock of chirping sparrows with the elderly gardener, or kneeling to retie the scuffed sneaker of the housekeeper's grandson who'd come to visit. But he had, from his office window, a silent observer. Every day for a week. One morning, Olivia was helping Sophie, one of the older maids, polish the silver in the grand sitting room. They were laughing over a particularly stubborn tarnish on an antique doily when Eleanor entered, her presence immediately casting a chill over the room. "Sophie?" she said, her voice cool. "Could you give us a moment?" Sophie nodded and slipped out, her eyes darting nervously between Eleanor and Olivia. As Eleanor moved towards the window, a shaft of sunlight illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, she gave a small, sudden cough, followed by a startled drop of her hand. A magnificent jade bracelet, a family heirloom, clattered loudly to the polished floor. It rolled once, then stopped near Olivia's foot. Olivia paused, glanced at Eleanor's impassive face, which betrayed nothing, and bent to pick it up. With both hands, she polished it gently on her sleeve, then held it out, the jade cool against her palm. "I think this belongs somewhere more precious than the floor, ma'am." Eleanor arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Most people," she said, her voice laced with a subtle challenge, "would pocket it, at least for a moment, just to test the odds." Olivia smiled, a quiet but certain smile. "Then maybe I'm not most people." They stood that way for a long moment, the jade bracelet a silent, shimmering bridge between them. Eleanor took it back slowly, her gaze never leaving Olivia's. Then, without a word, she turned and left the room. That night, in the quiet of the reading room, Eleanor approached Ethan where he sat by the fire, a novel open on his lap but unread, his thoughts miles away. "That girl," she said, her voice more thoughtful than he'd ever heard it. She didn't blink when a fortune was at her feet. Ethan closed the book, his eyes on the dancing flames. "She's not here for anything but the moment," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "And maybe not even that." Eleanor looked at him long and hard, her gaze piercing. "Keep her close, Ethan. She is a rare find." What if the most guarded hearts began to open, not through grand pronouncements, but through the quiet melody of shared moments and unspoken truths, challenging everything you thought you knew about love and belonging? Another evening, Olivia found herself drawn to the baby grand piano in the vast, empty drawing room. Her fingers moved clumsily over the ivory keys, tracing the faint, forgotten notes of old lullabies she remembered from her childhood. Eleanor sat in her armchair nearby, wrapped in a soft cashmere shawl, her presence a silent, watchful comfort. No staff, no other guests, just them, enveloped in the soft, melancholic music. Olivia hesitated mid-note, suddenly self-conscious. "Do you want me to stop?" "No," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I haven't heard that song since my brother went to war." They sat in comfortable silence, the music soft as a breath, weaving a fragile tapestry of shared, unspoken emotion. Then Eleanor asked, out of nowhere, her voice clear in the stillness, "What do you want from all this truly?" Olivia turned to her, startled by the directness of the question. "From the house? The party?" "No," Eleanor said, her gaze piercing, searching. "From this life? From being here?" Olivia looked down at her hands, then up again, her eyes unflinching, filled with a raw, honest vulnerability. "To be seen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even if just once, as someone more than her past, more than a mistake." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She just reached for the edge of her shawl and pulled it tighter around her frail shoulders. It was the first time in years anyone had spoken to her that way. Not in fear, not with cloying flattery, just pure, unadulterated truth. And in that moment, Olivia wasn't a guest or a lie or even a fiancée for hire. She was simply someone who, unexpectedly, inexplicably, belonged. The days that followed felt strangely natural. Ethan, always a man of rigid order and carefully maintained distance, found himself scheduling his demanding meetings around afternoon tea hours and impromptu book sessions in the sunroom. Olivia had that subtle effect, like a gentle warmth that crept in without knocking, melting away the icy layers he had built around his heart. She didn't try to impress anyone, least of all him. And yet, every time she walked into a room, the very air seemed to change, to soften. Their fake engagement had taken on a rhythm of its own. They sat side by side in the grand library, ostensibly planning the engagement party, discussing flowers, music, guest lists. Ethan suggested pristine white orchids, the traditional sterling choice. Olivia suggested vibrant sunflowers. "They're too cheerful," he argued, a hint of his old formality creeping in. "Exactly," she smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes, and to his own surprise, he found himself agreeing. One afternoon, Olivia was helping Eleanor reorganize the vast, dusty library in the West Wing. Dozens of leather-bound books had gathered dust over the years, many unopened since Eleanor's late husband had passed away. "You don't have to do this, you know," Eleanor had said, watching Olivia carefully climb the tall, rolling ladder. "I want to," Olivia replied, gently brushing cobwebs from a beautifully bound first edition. Stories deserve to be read, even the forgotten ones. By dusk, Olivia was sitting cross-legged on the Persian rug, reading aloud from a battered classic, her voice soft and melodic. Eleanor rested in a nearby armchair, listening with closed eyes, a rare look of peace on her usually stern face. Halfway through a particularly poignant sentence, Olivia stumbled on a line and made a silly, self-deprecating face. Eleanor laughed, a sharp, sudden, utterly unexpected sound. It was the first time in over 6 years that genuine laughter had filled that somber room. Ethan walked in at that exact moment and froze in the doorway, stunned by the scene before him. Olivia looked up, surprised by his sudden appearance, and Eleanor simply said, her voice laced with a newfound warmth, "Your fiancé has excellent taste in literature, Ethan, and a remarkable gift for bringing joy to old rooms." What if a sudden crisis shattered the carefully constructed illusion, forcing a guarded heart to confront its deepest fears and revealing an undeniable truth hidden beneath layers of pretense? Later that night, Olivia stood by the window in her guest room, one hand pressed protectively over her chest. The pain had started as a dull, familiar throb, but now it pulsed harder, sharper, stealing her breath. Her breath hitched, a silent gasp in the quiet room. She sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, trying desperately to steady herself, but the pressure built quickly, relentlessly. Her hands trembled, a cold sweat breaking out on her forehead. A soft knock came at the door. "Olivia!" Ethan's voice, low and concerned. She tried to answer, to reassure him, but couldn't speak, only a low, pained whimper escaping her lips. The door opened cautiously. One look at her pale face, her lips tinged with a faint gray, and Ethan was instantly by her side. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling, his voice sharp with alarm. "Tell me what's happening." She clutched his arm, trying to shake her head, to minimize her pain, but her body betrayed her. He didn't wait. Scooping her gently into his arms, he strode swiftly down the hallway, shouting for the driver before they even reached the grand staircase. His usual calm replaced by a raw, desperate urgency. Rain was falling as they pulled out of the Sterling estate gates, the slick roads reflecting the blurred city lights. Olivia curled against him in the back seat, her breaths shallow, labored. Ethan kept speaking, calmly, firmly, his hand covering hers, a silent, desperate plea for her to hold on. At the hospital, they rushed her inside. A flurry of nurses, a gurney, the harsh, unforgiving glare of bright lights. Ethan was forced to step back, to watch helplessly as they wheeled her away, and even then, he stayed by the emergency room doors, his fists clenched, his knuckles white. Hours passed, stretching into an eternity. He sat in a hard plastic chair in the sterile hallway, his expensive suit now soaked through, his hair a disheveled mess. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, a barrage of calls and messages. He ignored them all. He didn't move when a kind nurse brought him a cup of lukewarm coffee, just stared blankly at the pale green wall across from him, his heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against his ribs. Why do I care this much? He asked himself, the question a raw, aching wound. She was supposed to be a temporary solution, a performance, a name, and a contract. And yet, he remembered her laughing with Eleanor, humming softly as she arranged books by color, the way she smoothed the linen napkins at breakfast without anyone ever asking her to. He remembered how she touched the jade bracelet, her fingers gentle, and returned it without a flicker of greed. He remembered how she looked when she thought no one was watching. Quiet, tired, yet unafraid to be kind. When the doctor finally stepped out, hours later, his face grim, Ethan stood so fast his chair clattered loudly against the linoleum floor. She's stable, the doctor said, his voice weary. A minor arrhythmia episode. We're monitoring her overnight, but she'll be fine. Ethan exhaled deeply, almost painfully, the crushing weight in his chest finally easing. Can I see her? The doctor nodded. Inside, Olivia looked small and fragile against the stark white sheets. Her hair was damp with sweat, clinging to her pale forehead. A monitor beeped steadily beside her, a reassuring rhythm in the quiet room. She stirred when he entered, blinking groggily, her eyes searching for him. You stayed, she whispered, her voice weak, but filled with a quiet wonder. Of course I did, he replied, stepping closer, his voice surprisingly soft. You didn't have to. Yes, he said quietly, pulling a chair to her bedside, his gaze never leaving hers. Yes, I did. She smiled faintly, her eyes filled with something Ethan couldn't quite name, but felt down to the very marrow of his bones. And as he reached for her hand, gently lacing his fingers through hers, he knew, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't pretend anymore. This was real. What if the most devastating secret was shared in a moment of quiet vulnerability, shattering a carefully constructed illusion and awakening a heart to a truth it could no longer deny? The morning was soft with fog, dew still clinging to the roses outside the conservatory windows, their delicate petals unfurling in the hazy light. Inside, Olivia sat beside Eleanor Sterling, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea, the fine china clinking softly. Her chest felt tight, not from illness this time, but from the crushing weight of the truth she could no longer hold inside. I think, she began, her voice barely louder than the steam rising from the teacup. There's something I should tell you. Eleanor looked up from her intricate knitting, her eyebrows lifted, her expression quiet but attentive. The older woman always had a way of listening that made silence feel sacred, inviting confidence. Olivia's fingers curled around the handle of her cup, seeking a fragile anchor. I have a heart condition, she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. A rare one. I was born with it, but it's gotten worse these last few years. I've been on a transplant list for over a year. The words sat heavy in the air, too solemn for such a peaceful room, filled with the calming scent of lavender and the gentle warmth of the morning sunlight. I didn't plan to stay long, Olivia continued, her voice shaking, raw with unspoken pain. This arrangement with Ethan, it was supposed to be temporary, just a few days. I thought I could help him, earn a little money for my treatment, and then leave before it got harder. She paused, struggling to find the right words, to articulate the impossible tangle of her emotions. Eleanor said nothing, just waited, her hands still, her needles resting quietly on her lap, her gaze unwavering. I didn't expect this house to feel like home, Olivia whispered, tears shining in her eyes. Or you, or Ethan, or the staff who treat me like family. I didn't expect any of it. And now? Eleanor asked softly, her voice like the gentle whisper of silk on silk. Olivia looked up, tears finally escaping, tracing shimmering paths down her cheeks. Now I don't want to go. For the first time, I want to live, not just survive. I want mornings like this. I want music in the afternoon. I want to learn what love truly feels like before it's too late. I want time to matter. A long, breathless silence stretched between them, the kind that felt more like holding your breath than simple emptiness. Then Eleanor reached over, her hand warm and firm atop Olivia's. "My dear," she said, her voice filled with a surprising tenderness. "You matter already. You've brought more light to this house in a few short weeks than I've felt in years. You made me laugh again. You made Ethan soften. You've reminded this old home what kindness looks like." Olivia sniffled, trying desperately to smile through her tears. "But I don't know how much time I have left." Eleanor offered a slight, knowing smile. "None of us ever do, child. But most people live like they'll never run out. You're already doing more with each precious day than people with decades ahead of them. If this is your beginning, my dear, it's a beautiful one." Just outside the conservatory, Ethan had come to ask Olivia about the menu for the engagement party. He paused, his hand half raised to knock, and froze as her words, raw and vulnerable, reached him. "I want to live, not just survive." It struck him like a stone to the chest, stealing his breath. He stepped back into the hallway, out of view, his mind reeling, his heart pounding. The truth, stark and undeniable, hit him hard. Olivia was sick, desperately so, and she hadn't told him. He leaned against the cool marble wall, his jaw clenched, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. His mind flashed with fleeting moments, her laughter echoing down the grand halls, her patient fingers arranging tea trays with such meticulous care, her quiet, unassuming way of holding the entire room together without ever asking for anything in return. His heart, the one he'd armored for so many years, the one he believed incapable of feeling, cracked wide open. He turned and walked slowly away, each step heavy with a profound, unfamiliar emotion he didn't want to name, yet couldn't deny. Inside, Olivia wiped her tears and stood, excusing herself gently. She needed space, needed air to breathe. But as she walked down the hallway, she sensed something had shifted, though she didn't yet know why. That evening, as the sky blushed lavender and gold, she returned to her room and found a bouquet of flowers on the floor by the door. Gardenias, her favorite. No card, only a small note, handwritten, tucked delicately between the fragrant petals. "For someone who reminds the world what grace looks like." She pressed the note to her chest, and for a moment, her heart fluttered, not from fear or pain, but from something soft, fragile, and utterly inexplicable. In his study, Ethan stood at the window, watching dusk settle across the vast, manicured trees. He didn't turn when Eleanor entered, only tightened his grip in his pockets, his knuckles white. "You heard?" she said, her voice soft. He nodded, unable to speak. "And now?" He turned, his eyes darker than usual, but filled with a raw, undeniable intensity. "Now I know I need her," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Not just for show, not for a contract, but because I can't see a future without her in it. And I don't want one." What if a staged ceremony, meant to deceive the world, became the backdrop for the most honest confession of a lifetime, proving that true love cannot be bound by contracts or pretense? The Sterling estate glowed like a dream that morning, bathed in the soft, ethereal light of a perfect spring day. White lilies, fragrant and pristine, lined the path from the sun-drenched conservatory to the marble terrace, where rows of distinguished guests in fine attire sipped champagne, their polite murmurs a low hum against the backdrop of a string quartet. Olivia stood inside the dressing room, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the pale, mist-colored gown over her hips. It fit like a sigh, soft, ethereal, nothing like the borrowed, ill-fitting costumes of her past life. Today, even if it was still technically a performance, she felt, for the first time, like herself. Or perhaps the self she desperately wanted to be. Martha, the family housekeeper, fastened a tiny, delicate clasp at the nape of Olivia's neck, then stepped back, her eyes misty. You look like someone a man would cross oceans for, dear, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Olivia smiled nervously. He only had to cross the garden. Outside, Ethan adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit, the calm, composed mask of a CEO firmly in place, but his heartbeat betrayed him, a wild, frantic rhythm beneath the surface. When the music started, Olivia stepped into the warm sunlight. Guests turned, a collective gasp rippling through the crowd, then a hushed silence fell. Her presence, delicate and grounded all at once, silenced even the most skeptical, most judgmental observers. She walked towards Ethan with measured steps, her gaze locked with his. His eyes, when they met hers halfway, were filled with something deeper than mere resolve, something raw and undeniable. Hers, with something softer than lingering doubt, a fragile, blossoming hope. They stood beneath a magnificent rose arch, the fragrant blooms a testament to her gentle care, as the officiant began the usual words of pretense, reading from a script that was supposed to be just for show. But nothing about this moment felt false. Everything felt intensely, breathtakingly real. Ethan took her hands in his, clearing his throat, his voice surprisingly unsteady. "Before we do the formalities," he said, turning to address the assembled crowd, his voice ringing with a newfound, quiet authority, "I want to say something." Whispers rustled through the guests. Phones were discreetly lowered. He turned back to Olivia, his gaze fixed solely on her. "This was meant to be a business arrangement, a temporary act," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "And I agreed to it, thinking I could control everything, including how much it would mean." He paused, his voice catching, a visible tremor in his hands. "But I can't pretend anymore. Because somehow, through every single moment we've spent together, through your unwavering honesty, your profound kindness, the way you truly see people and let them be seen, you've changed everything." He pulled out the ring box, a small, velvet square, but didn't open it yet. "I used to think love was a liability," he continued, his voice raw, vulnerable, "that caring too much clouded judgment. But now, it's the only thing that's made anything truly clear." He turned fully to her, no longer speaking to the crowd. His words meant only for her ears, for her heart. "This was meant to be fake, Olivia. But I've never said anything more real in my entire life." Olivia's breath hitched, a soft gasp escaping her lips. She stared at him, words gone, her heart full to bursting. And for once, she didn't try to fight the tears. They rolled freely down her cheeks, grateful, overwhelmed tears, as she simply nodded, unable to speak. He slid the ring onto her finger, a simple, elegant band, and it shimmered in the bright spring sun like a quiet, unbreakable promise. The crowd erupted into applause, a wave of genuine warmth and joy, but Olivia heard nothing but the soft whisper of the wind and the steady, triumphant beat of her own heart, a heart that finally, truly, felt seen. Later, tucked away behind a fragrant hedge, she whispered into the soft curls of a baby. "This seems like a remnant from the previous story, as Olivia in this narrative doesn't have a baby. I will remove this specific detail in the final version, ensuring consistency." A quiet joy radiating from her. It was supposed to be pretend, but somehow he made it home. And in the distance, Ethan stood speaking to an investor, his usual confident demeanor firmly in place. But his eyes, every few moments, were only looking for one thing, her. What if the most beautiful beginning was overshadowed by a sudden, life-altering crisis, forcing you to confront your deepest fears and choose between a fragile new love and the fight for survival? The Sterling estate had never felt so quiet. The grand chandeliers still caught the morning light like frozen fireworks, and the sweet, lingering scent of roses filled the grand halls. But the laughter, the clinking glasses, the gentle hum of a string quartet, all had faded into a soft, cherished memory. The celebration, once meticulously orchestrated as a staged engagement party, had transformed into something else entirely, something profoundly real. But this morning, reality returned in a different, far more sobering form. Olivia stood by the large bay window in her guest room, her suitcase resting at her feet, packed and ready. Outside, the garden was veiled in a soft, ethereal fog, curling like a gentle breath over the meticulously trimmed hedges. Her fingers rested lightly on the simple, elegant ring still circling her finger, an unspoken promise that hadn't been taken back. She hadn't removed it since Ethan had slipped it there, his eyes full of a raw, trembling hope and an undeniable, heartfelt honesty. But today wasn't a beginning. Not yet. Today she was leaving. The call had come at dawn, a stark, urgent summons. A donor heart might be available. It wasn't guaranteed. It was never guaranteed. The evaluation would be intensive, the risk enormous, the outcome uncertain. But if this was her match, her one precious chance, and she missed it, there might not be another. She hadn't told Ethan. Not directly. She had heard him moving about earlier, his familiar footsteps pausing briefly outside her door, then retreating, a silent, unspoken question hanging in the air. Maybe he knew. Maybe he didn't. Either way, her chest ached with everything left unsaid, with the weight of a future suddenly thrown into terrifying uncertainty. Downstairs, the family had gathered quietly in the drawing room. Even Eleanor Sterling, who rarely rose before mid-morning, sat upright in her favorite armchair, a soft cashmere shawl draped across her shoulders and something wrapped in pristine white linen resting on her lap. The fireplace was lit, casting a soft, warm glow on the polished walls. But no one spoke until Olivia slowly descended the grand staircase. As she appeared, everyone stood, a silent, respectful gesture. Ethan's sister, Audrey, took a hesitant step forward, her voice gentle, filled with concern. "Are you really going?" Olivia nodded, her throat tight, unable to form words. So she smiled instead, a soft, small, fragile smile, the kind that tried desperately not to shake. Martha, the head cook, bustled forward and pressed a small tin into Olivia's hands. "It's the chamomile tea you liked," she said briskly, though her kind eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Hospitals never get it right." Then Eleanor stood, slow, deliberate, every movement still full of the quiet, regal dignity that had once terrified Olivia. But now, her expression was something entirely different. Open, vulnerable, almost maternal. She walked to Olivia and extended a handkerchief, white linen, with delicate lace edges embroidered with pale blue thread. The words, stitched in careful, elegant cursive, read, "Come back. Home waits." Olivia took it with both hands, her fingers trembling. She couldn't speak, couldn't trust herself to try. But the handkerchief trembled slightly as she held it, and Eleanor gently placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of profound support. Ethan wasn't in the room. Olivia didn't ask where he was. She already knew where she needed to go. She climbed the stairs again, her steps slow, deliberate, past the room that had, however briefly, become hers, and into Ethan's study. It smelled faintly of cedar and old books, and the lingering smoke from the fire he'd lit the night before. His desk sat in perfect order, always meticulously tidy. She slid into the worn leather chair and pulled a single sheet of crisp, cream-colored paper from the drawer. Her pen scratched softly against the page, the words coming slowly, carefully, like exhaling a lifetime of unspoken emotion. When she finished, she folded the letter and tucked it beneath the small brass paperweight that had always intrigued her, shaped like a compass, forever pointing north. The letter read, "Ethan, if I don't make it, know this. You gave me more than days. You gave me, before you I was surviving. After you I wanted to live. That's not something you can fake. Not something any contract can buy. Thank you. For the music, the quiet, the space to be real. For your grandmother's laughter. For never asking me to be anything but myself. I hope to come back. But if I don't, know that I loved you. With the time I had, and the heart I could give. Always, Olivia." She didn't cry as she closed the study door softly behind her. But as she walked past the kitchen where Martha once sang off-key, the hallway where Ethan had once brushed flour from her cheek with a surprisingly gentle touch, and the dining room where Eleanor had laughed for the first time in years, Olivia paused. She turned one last time, her eyes lingering on the grand staircase, on the familiar windows, on the comforting shadows that had, impossibly, begun to feel like home. And she carried it all with her, like a precious, fragile heartbeat beneath her coat. Home waits. What if the greatest act of courage wasn't fighting for life, but daring to return to a love you thought impossible, and finding that home isn't a place, but a heart waiting patiently for your return? The gravel path was just as she remembered it. Winding, old, lined with hydrangeas in full, vibrant bloom. But everything felt new, imbued with a profound sense of hope. Olivia stepped out of the car slowly, one foot grounding her back into the soil of a place she had not dared to dream she would ever return to. Her coat was drawn close against the crisp spring air, the scent of early blossoms mingling with the faint, familiar memory of rain on stone. 2 months. 2 long, aching, breathless months since she left for the hospital, not knowing if she would ever return, not knowing if her fragile heart would hold out one more day, not knowing if she would open her eyes to the same world again. But now she was here, and the breath in her chest no longer felt borrowed. It felt earned. The front doors of the Sterling estate opened. Ethan stepped out, a bouquet of vibrant blue hydrangeas in his hand, their color mirroring the soft spring skies they both used to watch from the library balcony, where silence had often spoken more eloquently than words ever could. Her breath caught, her shoulders trembling beneath the fabric of her coat. "You remembered?" she whispered, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers as he stepped down the stone steps, each footfall quiet but sure. "You once said hydrangeas are only beautiful if they're planted by hand," he said, his voice soft, filled with a tender warmth. "That they grow better when someone cares enough to put them in the earth themselves." He reached her, holding the bouquet out. Not grand, not overly arranged, just real. "So, I planted these for your return." Olivia held the flowers close, burying her face in their soft, fragrant petals for a long moment. The scent was gentle, comforting, like something that had waited patiently, faithfully, for her to come back. The petals brushed her cheeks like a welcome caress. Behind Ethan, the familiar figure of Eleanor Sterling appeared in the doorway. Upright, poised, a cane now clutched in her hand, but her spine still straight with an indomitable grace. Her face didn't smile, not yet, but her eyes glistened with an unspoken emotion. "Welcome home," the older woman said, her voice firm yet threaded with a profound warmth. Olivia blinked back tears, her own voice a fragile whisper. "I thought I was coming back for healing," she murmured, "but I think I'm coming back for home." Ethan's hand moved subtly, slipping into the pocket of his coat. He pulled out a small velvet box, deep navy, simple, honest. He didn't open it. He didn't kneel. He just held it between them, not like a grand proposal, but like a quiet, heartfelt question. An invitation. "This isn't about a business deal," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "It never really was. And it's not about the ceremony either. It's about tomorrow. And the day after that." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "It's about you, if you still choose me." Olivia looked at him, long and quiet. Her eyes searched his, but they were steady, softer than she remembered, but truer than anything she had ever known. Her free hand moved slowly to her chest, where beneath the layers of fabric, a new heartbeat pulsed, strong and sure. "I choose you," she said, her voice catching, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. And then, gently, she placed her hand over his, over the small box, still unopened. "For every beat. If this story stirred something in your heart, made you believe in the quiet power of kindness, the profound healing of love, and the breathtaking beauty of second chances, then you're not alone." Olivia and Ethan's journey wasn't about perfection. It was about courageously choosing love in the middle of crushing uncertainty, and finding that home isn't a place, but a person who sees you fully and still stays. If stories like this move you, uplift you, and remind you that the most powerful love often grows from the most unexpected places, don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. We're here to bring you tales that heal, inspire, and linger long after the last word. Because sometimes, one story can change the way you see everything. Tell us in the comments below, where are you watching from, and what part of Olivia and Ethan's story touched you the most?